Hi and welcome. Today we're going to be doing a review on an old film camera favourite of mine. The camera in question is the Olympus XA compact 35mm rangefinder camera, which uses the standard 35mm 24 or 36 exposure reels as you see here. I'm going to give you a glossary and an overview of the component parts of the camera and the operation of the camera and its functions, and then we're going to have a detailed look at how to load film and operate the camera in use. So we're going to go over to the bench and get a close-up on the camera and we'll take a look. The Olympus XA 35mm camera. So what is this camera? Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking it looks just like a compact, palm-sized, pocket-sized 35mm fully automated point and shoot camera that were prevalent in the 80s and 90s before digital stormed onto the scene and took over the world of photography. And, you know, you would be justified in thinking that, but what it is in fact is a fully featured aperture priority rangefinder camera tucked into the body of a small, fully automated 35mm pocketable point and shoot camera. And this is one of the reasons it's one of my favourite cameras, one of the most favourite cameras I've ever owned, and one of the very few film cameras that I kept when I moved on to digital and shot more exclusively with digital. And with this being a full-featured rangefinder with aperture priority mode, it gives you scope to be creative with your photography. We're going to have a walk around the camera and show you the component parts. So first of all, I'm going to bring this in nice and close, and we've got the front face of the camera, which has, as you can see, a sliding protective cover which covers the lens, the viewfinder, and also slides a cover, as you can see here, onto your rangefinder lens. So if you watch that, you can see that disappear and reappear as you slide the cover. Over here on this side is your aperture control, and you have apertures selectable from f2.8 right the way down to f22 on a slider, and then click upwards to a positive click stop, and that's your flash, which gives you a fixed exposure and an aperture of approximately f4. Now hopefully you'll be able to see, if I can get this visible, you can see the aperture inside the lens stopping down and opening up there. And it's a very simple aperture mechanism. It doesn't use a standard iris. It's effectively two plates that move down onto each other in that kind of shape, giving a smaller and smaller hole. So you're not going to get the absolutely beautiful bokeh of a multi-bladed iris large lens from an SLR camera, but you do get some really lovely shots with this. Unfortunately I don't have any to hand because all of my negatives are currently in storage, and the scans are on an old hard drive somewhere, but hopefully I'm planning to start using this again soon, so hopefully I will be able to show some samples from this and some of my other film cameras, which I'm going to take out and give a bit of a dusting to and try and get some use of. So on this side here you have some electrical contact points, a little push button selector here which pops out. I don't know, let's try and show you that. So if you watch this top little hole where my thumb is, you'll see a little pin that pops out there. This activates your flash, which is a separate unit that screws onto the side, and you could buy these in a presentation box with the flash, the XA11 flash, and which is powered by a single AAA battery, and it screws into the mount here, and then your electrical contact points are down here. Over on this side we have the hinge for the back, we have the wrist strap on a little clip, and we have the film winder. On the top we have the film counter window, we have the shutter button, which is a soft shutter button, it's electronic shutter, the notation XA, a grip piece there and a grip piece here which allow you to slide this open, and then over here you have the manual wind, rewind and door release latch, like so. Underneath the camera we have the rewind button, which is depressed when you rewind the film. You have a standard tripod mount, a battery door, which we'll look at in a moment, and a 4-way selectable switch, and we'll look at that in more detail in a moment. The back of the camera, there's really nothing to it at all other than the winding wheel on this side here, and again you've got the grip piece on the rear, the top and the front, so you've got several areas to grip this to slide it open so it's ready for use. Whoops, dropping it there. And the rear of the viewfinder, of course. And the winding wheel works very smoothly and effortlessly, and typically a couple of swipes with your thumb and you wound on a full frame. Even if you use this one-handed, you can hold it like so, and 3 or 4 winds and you're wound on, ready for your next shot. Okay, closing that now, we're going to pop open the back. So you lift up the film rewind handle, pull that straight up, just like many 35mm film cameras, so you'll be very familiar with that, and it pops open the back. Over here you have your pressure plate on a spring with a little cutout which goes into your cogged wheel there that your film feeds through, and up here you've got your winding wheel and your take-up spool down there, which will rotate freely on the spindle as they all do. You've then got your drive cog which pulls your film along by means of the teeth. You've got these guide rails up here. I will point out at this point, this camera is almost all plastic, so unlike a lot of SLRs at the time that have sort of machine metal alloy or what have you bits in the back here, the bulk of this is in fact plastic, but don't let that be a detriment to how good this camera is, because this camera is still very, very good. In here we have the slot for your 35mm film cartridge, which fits in much like any other, like so. We're going to go through loading a film and running that through the motions in just a moment. The back simply snaps closed, and you can't open or close the back with this open. You can't accidentally put your finger on top of this winder, which is a good thing, because as you're winding this on, as with all 35mm with a manual rewind, it will rotate this along with this winder and it will pull it along, as you'll see in a moment when we load this up with film. So you can't accidentally pull this and open the back while this is open, which is always a handy feature. You can't put your finger on that and stop it turning and put the film under too much tension. Okay, we're going to go back to the front and the top of the front specifically, and I'm going to bring this in nice and close so that you'll be able to see this. Now up here we have the focusing distance indicator, which goes, as you can see, from 0.85 of a metre up to infinity. Focusing is achieved by this very easy to locate focusing stalk, which sticks out at the bottom and is in fact actually visible, and you can contact it with the cover closed. So it sticks out just enough but not too much that you're going to accidentally knock it, and this is how you select your focus using the viewfinder and the rangefinder portion of that, and I'm going to try and get a through the viewfinder shot to show you that in a moment. Down here is your ASA selectable range from 25 ASA or ISO up to 800 ISO. So you can use a range of films and you can actually manually select the ISO and push or pull appropriately if you wish to do so. The lens is an Olympus Zuiko f2.8 35mm, so it's fixed focal length, and it's a very, very good, very sharp lens, and it gives beautiful images. At the time I first got this, I also had a Minox 35 GT, and a lot of people said how good the Minox was and how much better it was image quality wise to the Olympus XA. Now, I will concede in side-by-side comparisons, back in the days when I used to enlarge film on my enlarger and print it onto proper photographic paper, the Minox images were a little sharper, but I'm not going to sort of enthuse too much on that, because they were a little sharper, they were a little clearer and nicer generally, but not so much so that it made such a huge difference to me. The images from this are absolutely stunning, and what I found, the problem I found with the Minox is they tend to be very problematic and suffer from sticky shutters and seem to need services much more regularly. And I've owned a few Minox 35mm cameras, and as good as they are, they do tend to need servicing and suffer from sticky shutters regularly. They also use a battery that you can no longer get, so you have to use an adapter and button cells, which is a pain in the backside. And in addition to that, the Minox is not a rangefinder. It has focus markings on the lens, but you have to work on a guesstimation basis, and as with this, the focus readings are in meters, and me being in the UK, I still think in feet and inches, and focusing on the thing could be an absolute nightmare, and I had to try and think in meters, and it was very hit and miss. This thing, it takes all the thinking out of it for you. You've got a rangefinder built into here, and you select your aperture, the camera selects the shutter speed. The good thing about this being so small and light is you can shoot right the way down to 1/15 of a second quite easily with no camera shake as well. At this point we're going to look at some specifications just so we can be precise about things, and the width of the camera is 14.5 centimeters. The height of the camera at the highest point, which is on the sliding cover, is 65 centimeters, and the depth of the camera, again at the thickest point, which is the cover here, is about 40 centimeters. Now, the reason I've done that is you can see how small it is when it sits in my hand, but the problem is when people do this on videos, you don't know how big the hands are. I haven't got particularly big hands for a guy, so it is kind of difficult to tell. I mean, if I had huge spade-like hands, then this camera technically could be quite big and chunky, and I'm just kind of highlighting the point that it's not. It's very, very compact indeed. And I'm going to get good old trusty kitchen scales here, switch those on and zero them, and the weight of the camera with battery but without a film is 221 grams. With a film added, 239 grams, so 240 grams for the sake of argument is most certainly not heavy as regards cameras. Especially if you compare it to something like a Zorky rangefinder, which are Russian made, primarily metal. That'll probably be 3 or 4 times the weight of something like this, but still relatively compact and easy to carry around. This thing is so light, you can throw it in you could throw it in a handbag, you could throw it in your pocket, you can throw it pretty much anywhere that you can fit this small little form factor into and barely notice its presence, and you can just pop it out, slide open the lens cover, and it's ready to shoot in an instant. One more thing I will mention about the front that I forgot to mention is this clear little window up at the top here is where the metering sensor is, and as you adjust the ISO or the ASA, I'm going to see if I can get that focused, and hopefully you'll be able to see. Unfortunately that's not very clear, but what you have in there is a moving mask. So as you slide your ASA dial, it moves a mask up and down here to cover and uncover various parts of the metering system to register more or less light accordingly. This is a little tricky, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the rangefinder system, and you can see if I cover up this little window at the side of the viewfinder, you'll see this little square that's right at the bottom corner of the wooden portion there will disappear and reappear, and that is your rangefinder focusing window, which, although it's very, very tricky to see on here, you can actually see moves your subject side to side. It slides. It's like two layered images, one on top of the other, and this is how a rangefinder works. Essentially, you've got two lenses and you're matching up one to the other as it's moving a component inside, which tells you whether the distance overlay is correct. That's probably not the best description ever, but hopefully you'll get a bit of an idea of what I mean there. There are much better descriptions online of how a rangefinder works, but essentially they all work in the same manner. You have a little overlay square window in the middle. Now over on the left hand side, if I put my hand there, it's going to be tricky to see, but hopefully you'll be able to see that. Let me just try and focus that in a bit better so that you can actually see. Ah, there we go, that's a little bit better. So, now that we're focused inside the window, over here you'll see on the left hand side as I pan up and down a little bit there, and with my hand there, which is bouncing some of this light back into the sensor, you'll see that needle on the left hand side wavering up and down. If I move my hand away, you'll see it drop down. If I sort of reflect some of the light back into the sensor, you'll see it pop back up. And what you have there is 1, 2, so that's 1 second, half second, a quarter, 1/8, 1/15, 1/30th, 1/60th, 1/25th, 1/250th and 1/500th of a second, which is your maximum shutter speed. Up at the top there, the hatched bar that you can see, if I get that back into focus again, that if the needle wavers into there, that indicates overexposure. If it doesn't lift at all and it stays down at the bottom, that obviously indicates underexposure, and then you would need to open up or stop up your aperture accordingly, because once your film speed is set, of course, unless you've actually put a roll in and you're pushing or pulling the ISO of the film speed, but you can't change it shot for shot like you can on digital. That's how the focusing system and the metering system work. You select your aperture, and this is what I meant when I said it's a full-featured aperture priority camera. You can't change it to shutter priority. If you want to shoot a certain shutter, you will literally have to select the appropriate aperture to achieve that certain shutter, but it's essentially it's aperture priority in as much as you select which aperture you want for the appropriate depth of field that you want by sliding this up and down, which opens and closes your aperture blades inside your lens, as you can hopefully see there. And your camera will then tell you the shutter speed that you need to achieve correct exposure. Now there are a couple of other little bits and pieces to mention regarding exposure. Under here you have a 4-way selector switch, as I mentioned. When it's fully set back like so, it hinges out this way. When it's fully set back like so, it's off. Click it forward once to the first stop, and this gives you plus 1.5 EV. So if you're shooting something that's backlit and you want to force overexposure, so for example you're shooting a picture of somebody in front of a very bright window, or somebody on a snowy or white sandy background such as a beach for example, what you need to do, the meter will automatically expose you for the whole scene. The meter in the camera will automatically expose for the whole scene, and if the bulk of the scene is white, it will meter too low, so you need to push the exposure, usually a stop or so, and in this case it pushes the exposure a stop and a half. So if you're taking a photograph of somebody against a very bright background, somebody that's strongly backlit, that's what this does. So you click it forward and it will overexpose by a stop and a half. The next step is titled check. And what happens when I click it to this is your battery check. So as you can hear, first of all, you get a continuous tone beeping, and as you will see, if you watch this little LED up here, this illuminates. This indicates that your battery is good. If you don't get the continuous tone and a nicely illuminated LED, then your battery is duff and needs to be changed. I'll show you batteries in just a moment. And then the final one, if you flick it all the way up, is your self timer. And the handy thing about this is it also creates a little foot to aid stability. So you slide this open, wind on, position your camera accordingly, or fit it on a tripod or what have you. But if you stand it on something, as I say, this little foot creates a little bit more stability. Press your shutter button, and the LED will flash for approximately 10 seconds. And it will fire your shutter for you. And then if you click that right the way back, that's fully off. Now we're going to take a look at the battery compartment. To access this, you'll need a coin. A 1p coin is ideal. So you fit it into the curved grooved slot like below, give it a little twist just to slacken it off, and then you'll be able to undo this by hand, or using the thumbnail once it's loosened. And inside you'll find two AG13 button cell batteries, and these fit in with the positive side uppermost, which is the thicker side. So this is the negative, this is the positive side uppermost. Drop those both in there. They'll sit on the spring at the bottom. You've got the little cap which also has a positive sign inside the cap to show you which way on you're going. Pop that in, and then you can just start that off with your thumbnail. And then take your 1p coin and just nip that up. You don't have to wrench on that, crank it in, just nip it up so it's nice and tight. That's your batteries. The good thing about these is they are still commonly available, readily available, and you can even buy them in bulk packs for peanuts. If you go around marketplaces, you can buy cards with reams and reams of watch type batteries on, and the AG13 and the AG12s, which are most commonly used in a lot of 80s camera equipment, are very, very cheap to get a hold of and very easy to get a hold of, harking back to the point about the Minox battery. So you're not going to run out of those in a hurry, and two of these batteries will last a long time. The batteries I've had in this were put in probably along about 5 years ago, and I shot somewhere in the region of 20 rolls of film through that before I put this into storage, and it's literally been sat in storage with the batteries still installed, which is very, very naughty of me. You should always remove batteries from something if you're not intending to use them, so don't follow my advice and not my example. And but however, it's still clean in there, it's still dry in there, and the batteries are still good, so it just shows you that they will last a while. So that's how to install the batteries. That's the little extra switch on the front. This is how you select your aperture, which controls your depth of field. So you can take nice portrait shots with to get a blurry background with a wide aperture at f2.8, for example. And the camera will select your shutter speed for you. And the camera shutter, which I will show you here using my thumbnail, requires the tiniest bit of pressure. And the great thing about this is if you're taking a photograph and the shutter speed's a little slow, rather than a physical button like the old mechanical cameras that you really have to press and potentially introduce shake, with this particular thing it's so touch sensitive, the chances of shaking the camera when using it are very, very slim indeed. And what we're going to do in this next portion of the video is we're going to go through the process of loading the camera up with a roll of 35mm film, just normal standard 135, 24 or 36 exposure film, and how to use the camera. So the first thing you do is make sure that the lens cover is closed, flip up your little winding handle and pull this to pop open your door release. what I like to do at this point, this is entirely optional, and this is not something that that you have to do. A lot of people put the cartridge in here and then pull the film leader across. This is something I do with all film cameras because I personally find it works easier for me. But what I like to do is slide the film leader into the take-up spool and hook either the second or third perforation into the little hook on the take-up spool like so. Holding that in place with my thumb, I then take the entire cartridge across like so and slot it into place. Slot down this here, which engages with your film spool, and at this point you can give this a gentle wind back just to tension that film a little bit. Make sure that your film is engaged on the sprockets of the winder here. This is what moves it along and is held in place by the pressure plate with this little slot that you can see there. And then I'm going to hold this with my thumbnail just there so you can see what's going on, and then give this one full wind until it cocks the shutter and it stops winding at that point. This is to make sure that it actually travels onto the take-up spool correctly, and it's not going to pop off, because there's nothing more frustrating than putting all this into the thing, closing the back, winding it, and then going through what you think are 24 exposures only to find out that the film leader popped off and it's not actually been travelling along there at all. I've had that happen to me when I first started in photography years ago with 35mm. It's easy to do, much easier than you'd think, so be wary of that. Okay, at this point what you can then do is close the back and slide open your lens cover, fire this off, wind it once, fire a frame, wind it again, fire a frame, and I'd not wound it fully on there, and then wind it once more, and then the film window shows that you're at exposure number 1 and you're ready to go and start taking photographs. Now I'm going to pop the back open again just so you can see this whole thing moving along. So the good thing about this, a useful thing about this, is with the lens cover closed and the back open, you can actually fire the shutter, as you can hear there, and it will just fire at its fastest speed. This is purely for the purposes of advancing the film when you first install it. So as you can see, what happens now is you wind on and it pulls your film along, you press the shutter button and it exposes the film to light coming through the lens there. You can tell if the film is wound on, as you can with most manual rewind cameras, by watching this here. It's a little harder with the lens cover open because it does kind of obscure it, but if you watch this as you wind on, you will notice that it rotates along with the film. If this doesn't rotate, then your film is not travelling along. There's something going wrong there, at which point you need to rewind the film and open the back and investigate and see what's happening. Most likely it's just that the film wasn't actually on the take-up spool correctly. So I'm just flicking through here and we're going to go right the way through the 24 exposures, typically 25 or 26 you will find on these things. And when you're developing your own film with black and white and what have you, it's always a bonus to get a couple of extra frames. So there we go, we've hit a stop, it's not cocked the shutter, and we've come to the end of the film. At this point, what you would do is press in the rewind button here, flip up your lever handle here, and then start winding the film back in the opposite direction to which it was being wound. And what this does when you press this little rewind button in is it disengages the lock on this ratcheting mechanism here, allowing you to wind the film back in. As I'm winding this back in, I'm going to tell you about my one and only gripe with this camera, and that is this rewind lever. It is small, it is fiddly, and it doesn't bend over that way enough. It's not exactly flat enough to get a proper wind. So if you're in a hurry and trying to rewind this quickly, it's probably one of the most awkward ones I've ever used. But as long as you remember that and you bear that in mind and you don't try and rush it, it works absolutely fine. It's just that if this went out just a little further, it would give a much more natural position for winding back, but it's quite small and fiddly, and I don't have the biggest hands, so for somebody with sort of big meaty hands, sausage fingers, it could be very awkward, so do bear that in mind. But that is truly my one and only gripe with this camera, and being such a small camera, obviously some things have to give somewhere. So once that's done, you can then pop yourself another film in, or you can just close the back, close everything down, and then pop it away ready for the next time. To take a photograph, it's as simple as slide open the cover, look through the viewfinder and frame the image that you want to take. Use this little focusing lever at the bottom here, matching up the focusing distance with the little overlay square from your rangefinder window over here. Once those two items, they'll slip over each other side to side. Once they line up together, you know you're absolutely bang in focus and you're in the right place. You can then stop down your aperture if you wish. You can do this before or after. It doesn't make any difference to the image through the viewfinder because it's not a TTL system, so you're not seeing what the lens sees, so stopping down the viewfinder isn't going to darken your image any. So if you know you want to be shooting at, say, f8, you can stop it down to f8 before you focus and compose. But you select your aperture, and then the metering system inside the camera here over on the left hand side will tell you what your shutter speed is going to be. If you're shooting against a light background, a strongly backlit subject, as I say, you can flip this little foot forward one click and this will overexpose by a stop and a half for you. If you want to mount it and take a self-portrait once you've composed, flick it all the way forward and press your button and it will start the self-timer. And don't forget to pop it back when you've done though. But this will tell you, this metering needle will tell you what your shutter speed's going to be, and it will give you a hint if you need to maybe brace a little bit more if it's a slow shutter speed, or if you need to select a different aperture to suit the situation. For example, a narrow aperture is great for taking landscapes and getting a great depth of field, but if you need to capture something moving, say you're at a sporting event just for example, and there are people running around, you want to capture as much of them in focus as possible, but you want to freeze the movement, then you will need a faster shutter speed to do that. So you will need potentially to sacrifice the narrower aperture to achieve that faster shutter speed, otherwise you will get blur. So just bear that kind of thing in mind. But it's just like any other camera in that regard. The only difference is the only field that you control is the aperture. But for a camera of this size, to have a variable focus lens rather than a fixed focus lens, to have a variable aperture that you can manually select yourself, and to have a full featured rangefinder, it's quite a remarkable thing. And for anybody who wants to get into 35mm photography for a relatively cheap price but still have a decent compact camera to do it with without lugging around a bulky old film SLR, then I highly recommend the Olympus XA series. There's also an Olympus XA2, which was a much more simplistic one. Same kind of principle, but instead of your adjustable apertures on here, you have modes such as portrait, you'd have single person, double person, landscape, and sort of 2 or 3 modes on there instead of your aperture selections, but in essence the same camera. And then, as I say, should you ever need it, you do get the optional flash. I do have a flash for this. I've only used it once, twice out of curiosity, and that's sat in its box somewhere tucked away. But it's a unit that's about this long, so it adds a bit of length to the camera certainly, but it screws onto there and it gives you a separate little flash unit, which is quite a nifty little accessory. So there you go, that's the Olympus XA compact aperture priority rangefinder camera. I hope you found this video useful. Please check out my channel and other videos. I hope to be putting some more photography ones up shortly, because I've had a lot of friends recently getting into photography and asking me about basic photography things that that everybody needs to know when they start for creative photography with SLRs and the like. So I'm hoping to upload a few tutorials on that, and also hoping to cover some of my old film stuff, because I've kind of been getting a bit of an urge to shoot some more black and white film and do some more developing, and hoping to try some Caffeinol, which is a home brewed coffee based developer, which should be fun. So I have done that once years before, but only the once years and years ago, and there's a wealth of new information out there on the web, so I'm going to be looking into that and hopefully doing some of that. And hopefully I will be putting up a review of my Zenit E, which is another old clunky tank cover camera that I used to have, and the one that I have now is one that somebody gave me, which actually is in need of some repair. And possibly the Canon AT1 as well, which is a lovely SLR camera. They're the only film ones I have at the moment, and the other ones I have are digital, so I may be making some videos that feature those. But once again, thank you for watching. I hope you like this video. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next video.